Welcome back, everyone, to Random Thoughts, coming to you today with another Diamond deck breakdown in Runestrike. I wanted to start this off by saying we're going to take to the skies with Lora, but honestly, we're much more earthy, although more grimy and dirty. We're, of course, talking about Swamp Thingy, so let's jump in. We're going to start off where we always do, but we're adding a little bit just like we did last time with Zcon, in this case explaining what Swamp Thingy has to do with any of this. I think some of you that are more familiar with Runestrike probably will already know where this is going, but in case you aren't sure, if you've ever heard of Mortal Kombat, or really NetherRealm Studios in general, they also produce another game called Injustice, and that is a fighting game based on the DC Comics universe. One of those characters happens to be Swamp Thing, and this deck, as its coup de grace, its finishing move, kind of emulates portions of both games, and we'll talk about that briefly. Maybe not briefly. It's going to be pretty integral to the deck. But first, we're going to talk about Lora's champion powers. So first up, we have what was probably leaning everybody towards the flying aspect, which was something I'll talk about when we get to the individual cards, and that's Wings of Honor. You summon a Griffin to an empty slot. Now, a Griffin, which is not actually featured in the deck, so we're going to do a brief cutaway. And just like that, we have a Griffin on screen. So Griffin here is reworked since when I started playing, at the very least. I don't know if it went through other ones, but Griffin is a 3/5 for 5 mana, or in this case 4 blood, with flight and strike, deal 3 damage to an opposing minion. So essentially it gets past the drawback of flying because it will interact with the board. So we'll switch back to the champion and explain why this is relevant. One of the major things for this deck is you do have to, and this is kind of broken record time, manage your blood effectively. For Lora, all 3 of her powers are both powerful and important to the build. Realistically, you're going to be playing into A3 as you close and step towards the end of the game. But there are earlier points in the game, and you have to kind of decide based on your matchup how you want to utilize your blood ability, since they are on the expensive end. Wings of Honor is pretty good. It's pretty solid. You can get a sizable body, a relevant threat, and one that's going to, as normal minions, non-flying minions do, interact with the board. Plus, you can do some cute tricks at various points in the game. But primarily, if you can play a threat on turns 1, 2, or 3, obviously, some caveats there as you take a peek over on that side, over at the deck list. But if you can play a threat, then on turn 4, go threat Griffin, now you have a pretty sizable board to pressure your opponent with and try and bring that opposing life total down in prep for the finishing moves. So air superiority is a very cool trick that is not really common at this point in the game of Runestrike. It allows you to move target friendly minion to any friendly empty slot. So you can't swap, you can't overwrite, but you are able to evade a blocker, evade something that would eat your minion next turn, or eat an unopposed minion that your opponent was not expecting that to happen to. So maybe you were damaging it via Desert Twister, let's say. All right, I'm going to move something over there, and now I can eliminate it. Or maybe you would prefer to play Iron Bowl into that minion that it's going to eat and grow, but you already have something there. Let's move it out of the way. Or, as previously mentioned, you can just simply, hey, my opponent's going to eat my guy. I don't want that to happen. Let's instead just, do this. We actually have kind of a funny clip that I'm going to show right now from one of the live streams. So you know what we could do to be really cute? Oh my god, we're going to do this. Are we going to... Yeah, we could do this. Lel? This is so dumb! This is so dumb. Got him! Get that 3 for 1. So you have a lot of options with air superiority, but the last ability is Flight of the Valkyrie, and that is the most important and integral to this build, so we have to jump to the cards somewhat for this. Target friendly minion gains speed. I don't think anyone who's played Runestrike for any length of time will underestimate the power of speed as a keyword, but it's especially powerful when you can give it to 10/10 Tramplers. Shocker, I know. 10-10 trampling things with speed can be very dangerous. But does that really matter? Well, we're going to cheat and jump into the cards because we're actually talking about the last card in the deck as well as the first card in the deck. Guess what? That Awakened Earth that we just had on screen briefly will make Ambush cost 0. So you can go on turn 10, assuming you have the blood, Awakened Earth, ambush the Awakened Earth, give it speed. Now, whether you're going face and you're making that X-ray move, that brutality, potentially a fatality for all of my Mortal Kombat and Injustice fans out there, or you are simply crushing everything that's in front of you and then punching for some additional damage, either way, you're pretty happy. It's pretty important. So those are the champion powers. Let's jump into the cards. We obviously just talked about Ambush and Awakened Earth, but just for the sake of emphasis, this is the combo. Do you mulligan for these? No. You're waiting until turn 10 to play, obviously, the Awakened Earth on 10. You will likely find it. I will tell you right now, this deck needs 2. I only own 1. I didn't have enough essence in time to craft it, to play it. I was still able to rank up and still annihilate a lot of people, even before I unlocked A3. Obviously, it only got better from there. One thing that I've mentioned on stream a number of times is that in digital card games, especially ones such as Runestrike, where you have a limited number of ways to really influence your opponent's turn. There aren't counter spells. There's vanishingly few discard cards. It's not entirely revolving around the idea of these wombos, where you just blow somebody out of hand kind of thing, but they are very powerful and you have to respect them. So the fact that Lora can set these up and do these powerful things is very important and key, whether you're playing with or against Lora. Obviously, Ambush has other utility where you could play it on another minion. Earlier in the game, right now, you have 2 ambushes, 1 Awakened Earth, so if you're playing this version, which I don't recommend, definitely get the second Awakened Earth. You could, of course, just simply throw an ambush on something in between if needed. Or even if you had both, you have that flexibility. It's a 2-part combo. You can break up the pieces. Both pieces are valuable regardless of whether you have them together or not. They're just more valuable together. So beyond that, we're going to talk about Owl Familiar. Probably broken record, beating a dead horse, pick your cliche of choice. If I'm playing nature, I'm playing Owl Familiar. It's too good. The card immediately replaces itself. If it ever gets more than 1 card, your opponent's probably in a bad spot. It's kind of a must remove. Next up is Bloodscent Wolf. To me, I think this is important. I have debated including Pagan Harvest, spoiler for when we get to the changes section. Bloodscent Wolf allows you to kind of smooth out the fact that you have very expensive blood abilities. It's 4/3/5. That you don't have a 2-cost blood ability, and your higher end, it's uncomfortable. So it allows you to have some blood gain as you're going through the game. Next up is Mermaid. I just really like Mermaid. I could see it getting cut, but finding the combo pieces, even though you're waiting till turn 10, it's still a 24-card deck. You're going to go through roughly half your deck, depending on Mermaid usage or other things that come into play. Whether you end up fraying, we'll get there. 50 cards on top of your deck, because sometimes that happens. You may delay when you're able to get the combo. So Mermaid allows you to dig a little bit, allows you to put things on the board. Again, when I was talking about not air superiority, when we were talking about Wings of Honor with Griffins, it's important to present multiple threats simultaneously, so your opponent has to be forced into using a sweeper, especially the early game ones or earlier game ones will consume an entire turn. The big butts on Mermaid and the Griffin mean that maybe those arcane overloads don't get there. Point being is that you could, even though Mermaid isn't super threatening, it helps smooth things out. Next up is Sever the Source. Landing Sever the Source to reduce cost on any number of things in this deck can be very important. Plus, it's early game removal. It could go face, help you close things out. Really flexible. I just really like it. Bear Familiar is very much the meme of the deck. I really like the idea of A2 air superiority, but there are fleetingly few reach minions available to Myth and Nature. In fact, it's pretty much just Bear Familiar. So the reason why I care is because you could move Bear Familiar into a lane where the reach matters, which is often, to me, the liability with playing reach. Your opponent's naturally not going to play things in front of it unless it's a Sickle Stalker to just remove the bear immediately. In this fashion, similar to the clip that we played earlier, you're able to shift Bear Familiar to a lane and get the card advantage generated from reach. I think it's still a good idea. Bear Familiar is just not that great. The idea is fine, the execution not so much, so I would probably change these out. Dimensional Rift, however, is very important. Single target removal. It's a tempo gain. You can eliminate blockers. You can eliminate threats. You can just buy time. Screw with your opponent's plans because now their mana curve is all out of whack. There are a number of things because of the faction, the realm combination that you're running that are going to be difficult to remove, namely, say, the constructs, that sort of thing. It can be tough to make those things go away. Dimensional Rift solves that. Next up is Feast or Famine, actual removal, obviously within limitations. Feast rarely comes up, but it could. It's flexible. I could see replacing this with other things, but you don't want to go too light on your removal suite. We'll talk about other options momentarily. Freya is a legendary that I unlocked via just opening it in a pack, I want to say like right before I started playing Lora, or maybe right after. Freya's really good. You'll constantly see complaints about how she's potentially too strong. She's very strong. One drawback in this particular build is because the curve isn't very smooth, it's very common for you to end up stacking these flight minions on top of your deck, which is not necessarily a problem and can play into Arcane Overload. We'll get there momentarily. But you need to be conscious of the fact that you're stacking these things on top of your deck. You're not digging for your combo. Those cards may be bad top decks depending on the board state. You just have to be cognizant of that. Plus, but Freya boils down to you must remove her. You can't allow, you will win the game if Freya gets 2+ activations. 2 is, you're in a really good spot. You're very strong. 1 obviously replaces her. If you hit 3 or more, it's very hard to lose the game. It's possible, but it's difficult. Next up is Arcane Overload. Obviously, you can pair it with Freya to ensure, hey, I need to hit a bunch of damage. All right, I'll put that 7, 8, 9 drop on top. Arcane Overload. Assuming, of course, your hand is full. Otherwise, just your board clear. Board clears are necessary. I would like one more. I don't know where to find room because I think the Bear Familiar and other slots need to become other things instead. Next up is Flesh to Soil, again, part of the removal suite. This card is pretty important because it allows you to just remove something. You can obviously then dodge the lanes either via air superiority, moving your minions, or just don't play anything in front of it, and that's fine until it's late in the game and you go, oh, Awakened Earth with ambush and speed. Annihilate your stuff. Oops, you're dead. That happens sometimes. Otherwise, Flesh to Soil is a somewhat clunky, somewhat better Annihilate. Like, it's not better, it's just different, but you get the point. It's targeted removal. It will get stuff out of the way, remove things that you have to be concerned about. Next up is Iron Bull. It's Iron Bull. We'll just leave it at that. Another card that I'd like to include more copies of, again, spoiler for the additional changes section, is Spirit Surge. We played against a viewer on Ladder a few times on the stream, and they were running a Lora list that was, more kitted out than ours at the time. We were running something different, but when you have Spirit Surge, you have, come on, client, Gaia's Blessing. Couldn't quite click there. And you have a number of these other effects that gain life. You can end up clogging up the board with this deck and then gaining a ton of life and then just going, okay, well, through consistent champion punching, I kind of just wear you down and then Awakened Earth you to death. It happens. Spirit Surge is surprisingly good. Obviously, you want to play it when the board is full. There's matchups where that will work out, matchups where you won't, but there are a number of times where, quite simply, you need to gain a bunch of life, and this can gain you a ton of life. It's just a little clunky because of the cost. Last point. Desert Twister. It's good. Just run it. You're playing nature, play Twister. Next up is Gaia's Blessing. I almost said Nature's Chosen. Gaia's Blessing is surprisingly strong. You can and will run out of cards depending on whether your Freya's stick, whether you chain mermaids, you get an Owl Familiar to stay around. Gaia's Blessing is a late game card that will allow you to dig out of a hole and The 3 random runes, even if they're bad cards, they're still pretty decent most of the time, just because it's additional cards. Either they're threats, they're removal, they do something, and you can kind of engineer a scenario because all of them, well, they don't read when you play it, gain the life, because you gained it beforehand, but you get the point. They're all doing additional things because of the heal, so you don't feel as awful about finding some of the weaker nature cards that sometimes show up. And then, of course, sometimes you just go, I'll hit an 8, 9, and 10 drop, or 2 10 drops, or something like that. Even Sobek, who's I'm never really excited to play, either I don't want to include him in the deck, and it's even clunky to just play him, is, okay, I gained a ton of life and I have a body? Okay, I'll live with it. And then, of course, we close out with Awakened Earth, Swamp Thing himself. It is the focal point of the deck. It is your finisher. It is your wombo. You will fatality a whole bunch of people with this, and it's setting up, just getting them into range, and then they have to end the game. You have a layer of inevitability because of the champion punches, because you're just going to get in there here and there for damage. You'll eventually get there with Awakened Earth. Your opponent, regardless of what they're playing, unless they have, well, maybe not regardless, but because they could have life gain themselves to put themselves out of range, but eventually you will put them into range and you'll go, okay, Awakened Earth, ambush, speed, end the game. They have to respect it. So those are all the cards. Let's talk about things we could change about the deck. Here's the obvious one. Get 2 of these. You want 2 of these. It will be clunky because you're going to mulligan it away and then you're going to find it again on the mulligan, or draw it on turn 2 or 3 or whatever. And you're going to have these dead cards sitting in your hand. But ultimately, you need to play this, and playing it twice in a game is similar to some of the things I was mentioning earlier in the card breakdown. It's going to be hard to lose the game if you're able to pull that off. Even if you don't, you just only play it as a 10-10 trampler that reduces all cost of runes in your hand, and all nature runes in your hand and deck by 2. That's still pretty good. It also has Vast, so occasionally you'll be able to trip up some opposing flyers. The card's just really strong. You definitely want it. Due to the synergy with Awakened Earth, it's kind of difficult to justify a whole lot more myth cards. There are, of course, legendaries and other things that you can include, but let's talk about Transmute. Remember that combo I told you about? Well, if you have Transmute, it can come out 2 turns earlier. Now, it screws with your blood, so you actually need 6 blood, meaning that you need to way in advance plan ahead, because you're going to need 6 blood, as mentioned, to be able to speed or apply speed to the Awakened Earth on that turn 8. So you have to be very careful. It's going to be a delicate dance, but doing that earlier in the game is pretty good. Plus, that Awakened Earth is going to reduce the cost of the future Awakened Earth, and you can see the implications. So it's something to keep in mind. I haven't tried it with this, but it's something I'd be willing to explore. 3, 2, 1. I kind of wanted to do a neutral one, but let's throw Pagan Harvest out there. I mentioned some other cards when we were doing the card breakdown, but I want to spend some time talking about Pagan Harvest. This is an option that you can include because, again, this is a very blood-hungry deck. You're not a light champion, so you don't have access to By Light's Grace or any of the other blood generators. Instead, you have Bloodsent Wolf and Pagan Harvest. This would probably require some additional reworking for the main list to ensure that you have enough beasts, but at the end of the day, as long as you have a minion, you can get 2 blood. Now, you have to jump through some hoops, because if you have that Awakened Earth in hand, you might end up pitching it. But odds are not. It's the highest cost thing. This is discard lowest. It's not that many hoops to jump through. Let's be real. Ideally, you get the beast, and then you can be much more liberal with your blood usage, because you could expend it either moving things, creating griffins, whatever, giving something else speed, and then still having time to build up for the Awakened Earth. But it's something to keep in mind. Maybe run one of these just to give you an extra generation outlet, generation generator, whatever. You get the idea. Point is that Pagan Harvest could ease the burden a little bit for your blood generation. So we talked about a number of potential changes. Let's talk about overall thoughts for the deck. Overall, I really enjoyed this deck. It was definitely a lot of fun to just do something super powerful at the end of the game. And you can definitely do that by dropping 10-10 Tramplers that have Blitz and have speed. You're going to feel awesome when you do that. It's also cool and maybe a little too cute right now, but it's something to keep in mind for the future with air superiority, where you can do some tricks with rearranging your units. Of course, creating Griffin minions for free is also pretty cool. I think there's a lot to like about this deck. I think it's very powerful, and it has some oops, I win hands, which I think is very important for a lot of these games where you're playing it and your opponent must respect your end game. They don't have a choice. They have to find a way to either end the game or nullify what you're doing. It's important for your deck to be powerful enough to try and dictate the terms of the game. Put your opponent into an uncomfortable position where they have to adapt to you, and their deck or just their general play skill and strategy may not be in a position to do so. So that's kind of it for Lora, and that'll do it for this time. So before we jump into some games, as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.